live. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Bear With Me, where I've got Johnathan Wood from DaBearsBlog alongside me, and we are ready to talk to you about a Bears game that maybe we'll be talking about this for a long time because it might signal the end more than anything else. But I'll tell you what, Johnathan, this is one that I would like to forget almost as quickly as I can. You know what I mean? Oh, hang on. I think that I did the stupid thing where nobody could hear you again. See, this is exactly why we set these things up. Yep, every single time, Akusai. Every single time. Because I mute the audio output, Johnathan, when the little stream is starting thing spins pre-show, and then forget to unmute it for you. So I apologize. Nobody heard you. but
Okay, no worries.
but either way,
Am I good now?
yes, I think so. Right? Hey, could everybody hear him? We'll let people submit in the chat right there. But the show, like, we will technically be, Johnathan, recording the show live. Like, we are going to start Bear With Me here in a little bit, and folks are going to listen along, submit questions, and if you feel like sticking around, we can talk about them afterwards. But you get the idea. Does that sound about right?
Sounds like fun. Let's do it.
Perfect. Let's do it. All right. So I'm going to take a drink of water. Probably not the strongest thing I'll be drinking today after a game like that. But let's get the show going. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. 3, 2. What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And holy moly, do we have a game to talk about. I'm here with DaBearsBlog's Johnathan Wood after I had promised you, Johnathan, the spot to talk about Justin Fields' first start, but let me just take a guess and say you didn't expect his first start to look quite like this. How are you feeling after today's game?
Yeah. So I actually had an unexpected trip to the emergency vet for my cat this morning, but was happy to be home in time to go to watch the game. Figured, my day can't get any worse from here. May have been wrong about that, unfortunately. So it was not the pick me up I was hoping for.
I sat there after the game because when it comes to football, the most complicated part about it, Johnathan, is that I just refuse to let it make me legitimately sad. I've lived that life, right? Where your whole Sunday is ruined because of one bad game. And after a game with 9 sacks, 1 net passing yard in a passing league, for crying out loud, there actually are some positives that we can talk about here in a little bit, but I'll tell you the first one just to get the show going immediately, right? At least this game was decisive because I felt like maybe the second sack was on Fields because it looked to me like an RPO where he held the mesh point too long, got green dog blitzed, not non-reminiscent of Trubisky's 2019 sack that he took against the Saints, the big famous one, right? With Cam Jordan bearing down on him with 2 guys wide open. I think it was Taylor Gabriel and Anthony Miller. The point being, that's one play, and then there's 8 more. And so, past a certain point, it is absolutely beyond me how Matt Nagy continued to allow this offense to find its way into sack after sack after sack after sack without any max protect. And sure, we saw him try to move the pocket. We saw him try some things that your standard casual fan could come up with, but it is beyond me why Montgomery wasn't doing more in pass protection, why the Bears weren't finding more ways to do things to help protect the passer, because I felt like they made it easy for this Cleveland defense the entire game long. And boy, oh boy, did that paper tiger Cleveland defense become a real jungle cat today, huh?
Yeah. Gotta say hats off to Myles Garrett, right? The guy's an absolute stud, and he just dominated an inferior opponent today like you would hope to see from a player of that caliber. So to some extent you have to tip your cap to him, although I would have liked to see more, schemes to run the play away from him. I'd say more double teams, but I know I don't remember if it was a sack or just a hit on Fields when he was double teamed, and like neither of them even slowed him down. Sooner or later, we expected this to be a bad offensive line, a really bad offensive line going into the season, and it was a really, really, really bad offensive line today. And I thought they waited too long to try to account for that, but then when they did and started doing rollouts and stuff, Cleveland was right there ready for it, and there was really there's just nothing you can really do when you're that outmatched.
Yep. One thing that really, really hurt, in my opinion, was I remember it was early in the second half, which I'm going to say this right now. The fact that it took the Bears until the second half to try a rollout, they only had 17 plays, and rollouts are not some magic answer. I do feel like around Chicago circles, rollouts are being treated like they are God's gift to offense and always result in completions. They don't. But the fact that with the offensive line getting annihilated like they were, the Bears didn't try to move the pocket any sooner. Let's just call it questionable and get to the later point. It looked as if Fields ran one rollout play, right? Myles Garrett comes straight at him because the Browns have been ready for play action and rollouts the entire game, right? And Fields just runs around him and tries to fit a ball into a super tightly covered window, which is a different discussion, where the Bears wide receivers were completely incapable of separating based on what they had. And after that, anytime the Bears try to roll out, two guys were on him. They didn't respect the Bears play action fakes at all. And sure, there's an aspect of it where I would look you dead in the eyes and say they could have easily been doing more play action from under center. Under center tends to sell the fake a little bit stronger. They could have found more ways to max protect, chip with the running back. Anything. 9 sacks is ridiculous on 20 attempts, for crying out loud. Like, I'm left here, Johnathan, utterly speechless. Because Matt Nagy has been the primary coach that I have learned different things about offense within. And I know I started the game off saying, toss crack on 3rd and 2. That's really not an intrinsically bad play call. In fact, I don't know why Allen Robinson's not down blocking on his guy. But since then, the game just spiraled out of control. And I can't get out of my head, Johnathan, that after 2 sacks in a single series, they continued to let Fields get sacked and then get sacked again and then get sacked again. I mean, it was, I think reports are coming out that are saying that Justin Fields may have injured his hand late in the loss. And I'm sitting here like, who else am I going to blame that on? Am I really going to blame it on Jason Peters, who frankly showed up to help to bail the Bears out of having to start Elijah Wilkinson at left tackle? Like, who do I blame but Nagy and Pace? Right?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of a known huge issue going into the season, and it really reared its ugly head against one of the best fronts in the NFL today. I just want to especially shout out Matt Nagy calling yet another pocket pass, slow developing play on 4th and 10, down 20 with 3 minutes left instead of punting the ball that led to the 9th and final sack. Like, what are you doing? Your QB has already gotten killed today. Rookie in his first start who you're trying not to ruin forever, and you just go get him destroyed again. Like, what do you expect to happen in that situation? I just don't get it. The game was over. There was no point to that play call.
It's beyond me. It really is. And I have to highlight, because I kind of mentioned this at the start of the show, but we missed Rule of 3 this week, so I didn't get a chance to gush about how much I love the Browns defense. Like, Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney on the front end are dominant. And then you've got Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, John Johnson, and more on the back end. Like, they are a very, very good team. So just to try to be as moderate as possible, right? Like, if we just get negative where we're not being moderate enough to be realistic, it's not going to be this bad forever. But goodness gracious, 1 net passing yard in a league that's trying to give passing yards away, for crying out loud, that is ridiculous. ridiculous. One screen late in the game picked up 9 yards. The Browns have been running screens against the Bears' defensive line all freaking game, and the Bears just apparently didn't think about running a screen until the very end of the game, and that's not to say it would have worked. It really isn't. Like, the Bears' screen game has been terrible since Nagy's been in Chicago. It's never gotten better, but it just felt as if, for crying out loud, the Bears were out of answers. They had no ideas, and Justin Fields gets sacked 9 times. Sounds like he might be hurt. I think he's a better and more resilient player than getting like his whole career thrown off by one game. But suffice to say, pretty much as terrible a start as you could have asked for, right?
Yeah, I actually tweeted out something shortly before the game that Fields was going to be the 56th QB to make his first career start on the road since 2010. And I tweeted out some stats about the other 55 that, by and large, the performances weren't all that great. So, like, I wasn't expecting him to, like, drop 400 yards and 5 touchdowns or anything like that today. But I was looking this up again after the game, and his percentage was the worst of any on that list. His yards per attempt was the worst of any on that list. And his passer rating was not quite the worst. There were a few that turned it over a bunch and were worse than him, but he was like bottom 5 or 6 or so out of 56 guys. So it was certainly historically not a sparkling debut. The good news is that like that first game isn't really indicative of all that much in terms of career outcomes. Like Ryan Tannehill was bottom 5 in most stats off that list. There was like AJ McCarron was up towards the top. Brock Osweiler had a great debut. Andrew Luck's and Russell Wilson's were both terrible. So I said this before the game, and I want to emphasize that now so that it doesn't feel like I'm just copying out and trying to be like pro Bears now. But that first game, like, you don't want to judge too much on it in either direction. And I'd be saying the same thing if Justin Fields had actually like looked like an MVP today.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think that's where I'm at, right? You're summing it up well, that I also, like, I wanted, don't get me wrong, I'm a Bears fan. I wanted Justin Fields to throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, right? I wanted that magic trend-breaking game, but then Cleveland's defense comes online, and you're like, okay, so this isn't going to be good, you know? And then to end the game with 1 passing yard, I mean, I can't think of a decent image. I generally have images for these kinds of things, but I feel like, J-Dub, like, when it gets that low, there's a lot more at play than just your rookie quarterback struggled. And don't get me wrong, he might have gone up against one of the best defenses in the league. The Browns looked absolutely incredible today. They got everything they wanted. But 1 passing yard, I keep coming back to that, and I come back to the 4th down of the 4th and 2 decision after they got a gift off of, I think we could probably agree, a bit of a weak call on John Johnson to get a 48-yard defensive pass interference that just shunted the ball down into the red zone. When Nagy had the opportunity with the score at 3-13 with a 4th and 2, that who's to say it would have been easy or even a high percentage play, but if he had gotten that, sets the Bears up for a touchdown or even gets them into the end zone outright, makes that game 10-13, and at least you're trying. It felt as if Nagy chose to say, my defense just isn't going to give up anything else. And I couldn't help but feel like that decision was cowardly at the time, and probably still cowardly now, especially in a league that, as we saw from Kevin Stefanski, is getting bolder and bolder and bolder on 4th down every single week.
Yeah, I really thought that kicking the field goal there was just trying to generate anything positive for the offense. Yeah, that pass interference, I mean, he pushed off. That's one of those that probably if that pass falls incomplete, the refs don't throw a flag, but because it was the interception, they felt like they had to because he shouldn't have gotten the interception. And so, like, yeah, okay. But you just kind of, you get points off that drive, and then you can say, well, at least we had 2 scoring drives today instead of if you get nothing there, which, let's be honest, with how their offense played today, they probably aren't scoring there, even though I agree it was the right call to go for it. think that was more of a admitting they've already lost the game and just trying to be able to leave with some silver linings.
I guess therein lies the problem, right? I feel like head coach, and I'm not normally this rah head coach gotta do guy, but the head coach saying we already lost this game when your defense is putting on a clinic on the other side, like that's what we haven't talked about. This Bears defense came to play against Cleveland and they battled the Browns, I think, better than anybody has this season. They looked a very good Cleveland. They made a very good Cleveland offensive line look honestly pretty pedestrian, shut down the run. Robert Quinn came online out of absolutely nowhere. Like, they looked ferocious, even when Mack was hurt and Hicks was too tired to play because he looked like he was gasping for breath. No worries. Number 97, Mario Edwards, rips right through the line and sacks Baker Mayfield on a key third down that pins the Browns outside field goal range. I mean, they did everything. They did everything except take the ball away, which I think is credit to the Browns for not giving it away because it takes two to create a turnover. The fact that Nagy pushed away from this from that fourth down decision told me that he was just asking too much of a defense or giving up, and I did not like that, to say the least. But we've talked a little about the fourth down. What did you think of the defense? Did you see the same sparkling performance that I did?
Absolutely. Cleveland had 13 points going into the fourth quarter when they scored 30 in each of the first 2 weeks. And you might look like, oh, well, they got 26. But the defense just got gassed in the fourth quarter because the offense kept going 3 and out and having to punt the ball. I looked that up after the game, and Cleveland had the ball for like 10 seconds short of 40 minutes on the day. And so they were already at about 30 minutes going into the fourth quarter. And so the defense just got gassed. But before that, they were really, really good. I kind of wrote this week, I did a bit of a look at Cleveland's offense, and they really want to run the ball to set up the pass. They want to stay ahead of the chains in imbalanced situations where they can keep you off guard. And Chicago just completely took that away from them for the entire first 3 quarters. That Cleveland just went away from running the ball. They stopped trying after about the first 2 drives because they couldn't. And that's why then they were getting behind the chains and playing right into the Bears' hands. And their defense, I got to eat some crow on this one because I said going into the season that I didn't think their defense would be very good this year. And I took some victory laps about that after week 1 against the Rams. But the last 2 weeks, they have really, really impressed me and played at a level that I didn't think was possible with how bad I think their secondary is.
And I think one thing that could easily become overrated about this defense, because we do need to call it out. Most offenses are going to be more like the Rams, right? They're going to be set up to pass the ball, and they have a running component. The Bears are currently set up to play teams like Cleveland that are the opposite, that they run first to set up the pass, because their defensive line, even without Eddie Goldman, might be one of the strongest defensive lines in football. Their secondary really struggles, but I can't help but tip my hat to Sean Desai for what he's doing with the Bears' pattern match zones, consistent confusion up front. Sean Desai is getting as much as he can out of a defense that's seeing Jalen Johnson rise into the ranks of maybe some of the best corners in the game. I'm not trying to say he's the best just yet, but he's at least entering that top 15, top 10 conversation. He looks great. And with the Bears getting the pressure that they have over the last 2 weeks, which I thought Cincy was one thing, right? Their offensive line's not dissimilar to the Bears. They're practically putting a bunch of backups out there. But to do this to the Browns, goodness gracious. Like you're saying, I didn't think that a team that was, I think, 22nd in pass rush, like pressure rate, whatever it is, last year, with functionally the same players, was going to rocket up like they have, but they looked ferocious.
Yeah, and I think part of that goes to Sean Desai, who I don't have the numbers on this, but I'm pretty sure he's like blitzing more and just mixing up the pass rush with stunts and things like that than Pagano did the last 2 years. But also, can't believe we've gotten this far without mentioning, oh, you did earlier, but Robert Quinn. Gotta tip my hat to him. You know, he had, I think, 2 more sacks today. He's up to like 4.5 on the year already through 3 games. He is really having a pretty nice bounce back after a pretty down year last year, and I thought today was easily his best game as a Bear so far. He was just kind of a menace off the edge.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Robert Quinn has always been a funny one for me because I would argue that the most known thing that I did was make a video when we signed Robert Quinn about how he was that third piece to the Bears pass rush, and then he was a ghost in the 2020 or in the 2020 season. So I feel like I can't really bring him up. Thank you for bringing it up because he looks like exactly the player that I was anticipating he would be. He looks quick. He looks like that turf toe injury really took a lot of juice out of his sails last year because right now, I mean, whenever Sean Desai has lined up Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn on the same side, they've got an instantaneous pressure. Like, I love the way that Desai is deploying them. He's not being boring about it, and I think that's really cool. But there's an aspect of you've got to tip your hat to Quinn, who looks faster. He's drawing double teams again. He's helping set up the rest of his team, and honestly, he's even playing not bad run defense. He looks like a man who's trying to not get cut from a huge contract, and I don't blame him, and I'll take the production, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. If he keeps playing like this, he definitely gets at least another year in Chicago because they could cut him and save a little money next year, but they'd eat a lot of dead money to do so. And if he keeps playing like a high quality starter, it doesn't really make sense for them to do that. So that would earn him his like $15 million salary for next year or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, obviously the story of this game is the offense. And what really bums me out, like we could circle back for a third time before we've even hit the break on one passing yard, but let's leave that for the back half. This even sadder part is that through the first half, they weren't running the ball badly. Like, don't get me wrong, 3.7 yards per carry is nothing to go throw a parade about. 4.1 if you add Justin Fields' run. But it's more to say that this passing game was so unbelievably non-functional and lifeless that it even took the wind out of whatever running game the Bears were able to produce with a line full of James Daniels has looked okay, but you've got a UDFA, a guy who was cut by Seattle and looked like it today with another costly false start there near the end of the first half in Jermaine Ifedi, a guy who came off of a fishing boat that, again, looked like it. 39-year-old Jason Peters, by the way, I feel like I have to say this. Whenever I'm coming after Sam Mustipher, who's a UDFA, it's not that I'm coming after Mustipher. I'm coming after Pace, who said a UDFA was good enough to start with my new rookie. I'm coming after the guy who put the team together, not Jason Peters, who had functionally retired and then came back to play for Chicago so that Elijah Wilkinson didn't. It's not about the players themselves per se. It's about the team construction, and that I think you would agree with me, J-Dub. We could see this from orbit coming into this season, that games like this were going to come, especially against the 49ers defense, which has plenty of pass rushers to boot. The Lions are not terrible defensively this season. The Packers have plenty of weapons in Zadarius Smith, Kenny Clark. Like, there is enough in the division alone, without even bringing up the Vikings, Daniil Hunter, and the other players that they have, to warrant offensive line concerns. The Browns game was always circled for me as this was going to be a problem, but gracious alive, it just feels like the Bears steered right into it, you know?
Yeah, and this is where the Tevin Jenkins back injury really hurt so bad because they were banking so much on him. I mean, basically have two guys on their offensive line right now that they have anything invested in. They gave Whitehair a big contract. They drafted James Daniels in the second round. Everybody else is an undrafted player or a cheap cast off from another team, and you just expect your offensive line is going to be terrible out of that. And unfortunately, as a Bears fan, I have plenty of experience in knowing that a terrible offensive line kind of screws your entire offense over.
Mm-hmm. And it hurt. And before we go to break, I feel like the hardest part about watching this was that Justin Fields, to me, looked like a rookie within this situation. Like, Fields' one, if you could call it a knock coming out of school, is that he was not Mac Jones in terms of so much experience playing inside of a very standard RPO system that he was going to make these quick reads and basically play the NFL-style quick game quickly, or like effectively, right? We knew Fields could make intermediate throws. We knew Fields was very, very accurate when he threw the ball. We knew Fields could make a deep throw just about from anywhere on the field, but I think we also saw at OSU that they didn't utilize quick game, partially because I don't think Fields liked it. Even his RPOs take a little bit longer, and it felt like the big mesh that really blew this game wide open was that with Fields playing about a half second slow and the offensive line playing as bad as they were, which allowed the Cleveland defensive line to speed things up an extra half second, it looked to me as if from a schematic standpoint, Fields just never had a chance. Like, maybe Dalton could have rescued bits and pieces of this game by just ditching the ball. Because honestly, he does not throw far. You've talked about it before on Twitter that I think Dalton's like average target distance is like 5 yards or something. Like this is a very
0.2.
What did you say? 4.2? But yeah, like Dalton is a short thrower, but at least he'll get the ball out. With Fields, it looked as if, I don't know whether it is an inability to adjust to the players around them, which is like straight off of the hot take line from Twitter, or what, but it felt as if Fields was just never going to have a chance within this game plan, as if they had asked him, okay, Fields, you're not playing quickly, but we need you to just speed up. And I don't know, that just burns me up inside talking about it.
To be fair, I think Fields did speed up quite a bit in the second half. So, like the first half, they had 9 called dropbacks. 4 of them were sacks. 1 was a scramble. So less than half of his dropbacks did he actually get a pass off. He got 16 passes off in the second half, and he did a lot of like the short, quick stuff. The issue was almost every time he was throwing to somebody who was covered, sometimes double covered, on like a little 3-yard out. Like, and this is where like it's so hard to tell from just watching the TV feed. You need to have the all 22, but it just felt like nobody was open at all. Like Cleveland was just all over them. And so yeah, you have no time and nobody is getting open. I don't know how you can really evaluate anything from Fields in this game.
I don't either. I mean, we'll have to go to break because we're hitting about that time. But this is one of those where I guess my feelings, you tell me if you think I'm being a homer, but I can't put any of this on Fields because the whole offense looked so bad around him. Wide receivers, offensive line, like the passing attack specifically, that I don't look at these 9 sacks and think to myself, well, Fields should have clearly done better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, again, it's hard to tell from a first watch, but a lot of them, it was like he hits his drop, like, you know, his 3-5, whatever step drop, and there's somebody, sometimes 2 guys on him right away. Like, I don't know what he's supposed to do, but that's where I'm really, really curious to see Lester Wiltfong's sack watch this week, because I want to see him break down all 9 of those. First, advanced props to Lester for having to take the time to do that. I'm sure he's working overtime for that. He does a really good job of breaking those down and showing what happened. And I want to see what happened on those plays and where the dysfunction is. Is it just guys getting beat? Is it a schematic thing that this is going to be a lot of sacks happen? Is this going to be a lot of on fields that he didn't get it out quick enough or didn't make the right read or something, or what? I just want to have somebody really break that down for me on those 9 plays, and so I can get a better idea for what exactly happened here.
Mm-hmm. And like you're saying, when it comes to detailed schematic breakdown, we're going to need the all-22 for it. But either way, you know as well as I do, John, like, we've got a 6-26 loss on our hands. We've got a Andy Dalton who, according to some reports, might be ready to play as early as this next week. There is a lot of where do we go from here we have to talk about, and after the break, we'll do just that. Listeners, we'll see you on the other side. All right, so this is halftime. How are you feeling?
About my cat.
What happened to your cat? What's going on?
Actually, my other cat, I've got two,
Okay.
and one of them's still. He wasn't eating. I hadn't eaten for about a day, so we just took him to get checked out. Thought he might have an ear infection because he kept scratching his ear. Turns out he has kidney disease.
Oh, good.
So, flushing him with IVs to get rid of the toxic things that are building up in his blood, and then we've got to just adjust his diet going forward. It's apparently common with older cats and is totally manageable if you know it's happening. We just didn't. So,
That makes sense. Also,
it was a fun morning.
I can't even imagine, man. I'm so sorry about that. But if you're ready for the second half, I am. You good to go?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. And we are back with Bear With Me. I'm Robert Schmitz, talking to DaBearsBlog's Johnathan Wood, the statistician that honestly gets us a ton of the data that we use around Bears circles. And so thank you so much for that, by the way, Johnathan. I never feel like I thank you enough for all the work that you do. But now we got to talk about where do we go from here. Let's talk gut call speculation, because the game was what the game was. Do you think this is the kind of game where Matt Nagy sticks with Justin Fields going forward or tries to make a switch back to Dalton?
I think the number one factor to determine that is honestly if Dalton is healthy. Right? Because we've heard conflicting reports on that. Even today, some people saying he could be back next week, but Adam Schefter said he's going to miss some more time. But I know they didn't put him on IR, which would be at least 3 weeks. So they think he can be back at least either next week or in week. Next week's 4. Yeah. So like sometime in the next 2 weeks. I think if Dalton's healthy enough to go, Nagy is going to look at today and go straight back to Dalton. Because like you were saying earlier, all of those 4-yard passes that go nowhere at least are more aesthetically pleasing, even if they only lead to 14 points in a game and a half.
I mean, exactly like you're talking about. I feel like that's the most complicated part of this. That's the part that frustrates me the most, is that I have absolutely no idea if Andy Dalton would have done any better against this this defensive front, but I do think things might have looked a little bit less lifeless. The other thing that I think is kind of funny about it is that there's a decent chance that if Dalton just sort of gets the ball out, takes the snap, gets the ball out, takes the snap, gets the ball out, at least we would have been able to either A, blame the wide receivers, or B, score enough to keep up with Cleveland's paltry 13 points. It's not that I think Andy Dalton's good. It's that maybe Matt Nagy only knows how to call one type of game, that being a West Coast offense when it comes to protecting his offensive line. And Dalton can play that game. Fields is never going to. Like, if you were to design an offense around Fields' talent, it's just not going to be West Coast. And so I don't know what happens next, but I will tell you that I am right on the line. The coin is standing on its side between I want to see Fields play more so that he can continue to get experience, and saying I don't think Justin Fields needs to be anywhere near this offense. I don't know what he'll learn from it, and he can't get hurt on the sidelines and running the scout team in practice. Where are you feeling? Do you want to continue to see Justin Fields, or is this the kind of game that has you thinking, stay the heck away?
I really want to see Fields next week against Detroit, just because I was really intrigued by what I saw from him in the second half against Cincy. He took, I think, 4 or 5 deep shots and 13 passes, and never connected on any of them due to like just missing with some guys he was out of sync with because he hadn't practiced with them, or straight up drops by players. But I want to see him go against a defense that doesn't have Myles Garrett and one of the best pass rushes in the NFL, and also is a pretty bad secondary, and just see if when he has a little bit of time what he can do with making plays down the field. I want him to get a chance to go against a defense that he can actually have some success against, and hope that we can see that, because I felt he was really close to really lighting up the box score against Cincinnati last week, and I think he could do the same against Detroit.
To your point,
potentially.
To your point, I feel like there is an aspect of overreaction where I said it at the start of the show, like, they're not going to be playing Cleveland every single week. And while this could very well be the final domino to fall that really pushes Matt Nagy out the door eventually, that doesn't mean that they aren't playing the Lions next week. With that being that being maybe the worst team that they'll have on their schedule, right? Even the New York Giants look somewhat feisty. And with their offense where it is, I mean, it feels so impossibly hard to judge where their offense is even at, because I know last week it felt as if they had Fields running quote unquote Dalton's game plan, and quote unquote, I mean, I think I even said this, we need to see him next week with a game plan tailored to him. And if memory serves, there were even interviewers that had talked to Nagy saying we had figured out how to tailor this game plan to Fields. And if that was the plan, I mean, I can't imagine being in the meeting room after the fact where John DeFilippo, Bill Lazor, Matt Nagy, and the rest of the offensive staff come together and say, okay, so it turns out we had no answers. I hope, now that you mention it, that he does get the game against Detroit. I don't think there's any way it could be worse than this one. And in fact, I think that, like you're saying, he really could do quite well, especially if the offensive line provides him the time that he had against Cincinnati. But we will have to see, because ultimately it's out of our hands. Did today's game move the needle at all for you with Nagy, or were you already on the boat of let's push him out the door?
So it didn't really change what I've been feeling about Nagy. Actually, you put me kind of on to this last year with your description of Nick Foles as a mirror, which I really liked last year. Being that, like, he's not going to elevate or drag down an offense, he's just going to reflect what's around him. And that mirror showed some ugly things, particularly about Nagy. I thought last year was really the year to make the judgment on Nagy, because he got his quarterback, his hand-picked quarterback. He didn't have the Trubisky excuse anymore, and he could not make it work with Foles at all. So at that point, I was completely out on Nagy as a play caller, even though I think he does some really good things as a head coach overall. I am pretty out on him as an offensive coordinator, and today certainly didn't do anything to change that belief.
That makes plenty of sense. I mean, especially given that as we watched this game, and Foles, I think it was Foles specifically that got caught on camera, I don't know if you saw this, saying, this offense ain't working. Like, you could even make the argument that maybe what Nick Foles was saying in that early presser when he finally got the mic and basically just lambasted everything about, like, working with Nagy from an offensive perspective, maybe he was telling us a little bit more of the truth than we wanted to hear, or that I know I wanted to hear, given that I was still all high on Fields. But like you're saying, this may be, I don't know, to cut back to the real meat of the bone here, how Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace justify a performance like this to George McCaskey, who watched the same game we did and watched the Bears put up. Did Brad Biggs say it is their worst offensive performance since 40 years ago?
I think I saw 1981 as the date in terms of yards gained, which I think points is probably a better evaluation of the offense, but yeah, whatever. Yeah, I agree, but at the same time, like we all said at the end of last year, how in the world do the McCaskies look at that 6-game losing streak and then ending the season with back-to-back blowout losses where the offense went right back to looking completely inept as soon as they were no longer facing the Jaguars or Texans or Lions. And yet here we are right again with the exact same people calling the shots. If they didn't get fired after 2020, I don't see how they get fired now that they have Fields to point to as the future. You have to give them time to evaluate with him. You can't do that based on a rookie, I really don't think, especially because if it doesn't go well, the immediate future, they're going to go back to Dalton and stick with him for as long as they can.
I can only hope, Johnathan, that in this case specifically, owners talk to each other. We know that much, right? The McCaskies have their friends, and they all watched what happened in Los Angeles just last year as Anthony Lynn, who's now an offensive coordinator that's actually getting praise for the work he's doing in, I can't remember where. I just know that their offense doesn't look absolutely horrible. He got fired after handling Justin Herbert in a way that ultimately led him to Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he still ended up out the door at the end of the all proceedings. We'll have to see what happens, because this was the kind of finality moment that I know I needed, where up till this point I was completely ambivalent on whether or not he stuck around. I would love to pretend like I cared, but I would tell you with an upfront face that I think things got better, or I would have thought things would have gotten better with Justin Fields, even just some schematic betterness. It didn't have to be instant results, but better than what we just saw. And yet I had a feeling that the Brian Dabbles, the Joe Brady's, the Greg Romans of the world, that somebody else could do at least as good, right? It wasn't as if Nagy was sparkling. So this was the game that maybe I needed it, just to remind me, I think this is over. Like, this Nagy era has got to, I don't know. I'm sitting here wanting to act like it's over, Johnathan, and yet I know, you know, and the chat knows that the George McCaskey ownership just makes this so murky, because I can't really predict what he is going to do, you know?
Yeah, we all thought it was over last year when they lost to the Lions and got humiliated by the Packers, and you know, apparently Darnell Mooney had a decent rookie year, and that was enough to keep him around. Good collaboration, whatever the that horrible press conference back in January
Conviction
was.
fired up.
Yeah, they really seem to like Ryan Pace, and well, maybe Ryan Pace tries to make Nagy the sacrificial goat this year. I don't know.
Right. Who knows?
But I'm certainly not going to say that this week 3 game was the nail in the coffin, because we all thought that mid-season last year, and somehow that wasn't the case. So
fair enough.
they will, I'm sure, like finish strong. Fields looks good the last 2 weeks. Maybe Larry Borum plays the last couple of weeks and doesn't look terrible, and then they can pitch that. We've got these promising rookies, and you got to give us another chance, and that'll be good enough. Who knows?
Yep. I mean, to your point, I am being way too relaxed to act like the door hadn't already shut, you know? That somehow Fields would just breathe so much life into the offense that Nagy would suddenly ascend. But hey, that's how it goes when you cover the team sometimes. But getting back to this specific game, so getting away from the narrative of what it was, let's talk like the player that you thought, if you were going to give you game balls out, right? Let's say you've got an offensive and a defensive game ball. Who would you give your defensive game ball to?
I think that one's pretty clearly Robert Quinn. I mean, he was all over. He had 2 sacks, a couple more pressures or QB hits. Hat tip to Jalen Johnson, but Robert Quinn for sure.
Since I get a second game ball, I'll give it to Jalen Johnson. I didn't expect him to do as well as he did against Odell Beckham Jr., which, hey, Odell is an awesome receiver. Like, he could stop on a dime, as we saw in the very start of the game, right? Where he ultimately, I think he basically robbed DeAndre Houston Carson inside of his own zone of a first down. But Jalen knocked away a couple passes. Jalen got his hands on a ball that could have been intercepted. I mean, he got about as much as he gave against a receiver I would tell you was a bad matchup for him. And at the end of the day, like, that's exciting because he can be a building block going forward. But now we have to talk about the offense.
Also,
yeah?
all right, real quick, sticking with Jalen, I thought it was interesting. He was shadowing Odell Beckham today, swapping sides. He didn't follow him to the slot, but I think that's the first time they've done that with him, that he had just stuck to his side before. So I was really happy to see that, and that he responded well and was able to cover well on both sides. I'd like to see them use him that way more going forward, given the pretty sizable gap between him and the other corners on the roster.
Mm-hmm. But now we have to talk about offensive, Johnathan. You have to give someone a game ball. Do you want me to start, or do you have somebody in mind?
Go for it.
If you made me, I would probably give one to David Montgomery, because I think, assuming that we don't do the quarterback thing, right, where we say Justin Fields had the most yards gained on the day because we don't take his sacks away, David Montgomery was really the only offensive player that I would argue performed at or above his station. Low bar, but we're talking about one of the worst offensive performances that we've seen in the eras. So I'll give it to the running back who did not play badly and took two passes. I think he made 20 yards out of them and took a couple handoffs for probably 40 to 50 yards. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but he was probably the only player that I would say looked like himself in a day where Allen Robinson got absolutely shuttered. Darnell Mooney was nowhere. I don't think I heard Goodwin or Bird's name, and Cole Kmet failed to separate for his third week in a row.
I know we did hear Goodwin's name once when he failed to come back on the comeback route on that one rollout, and thus what should be a 15-yard gain turned into an incompletion.
Yep, there it is.
Monty would be mine with basically those same words. So there's really nobody else to go to. So I'm going to take an unusual route in this one, and I'm going to give a game ball to Justin Fields because he got the shit beat out of him for 60 minutes, but kept getting up and trying again. So hats off for that, at least, I guess.
I feel like there is an aspect of just perseverance, right? Where I don't know what this does to Matt Nagy and Justin Fields' relationship. You can't imagine it's good, right? I tend to doubt that they sat in these offensive meetings and thought, okay, so the game plan, Justin, is that you're going to get the tar beat out of you. And it'll get better. It'll get better next week. There's no way that was the plan. So I give some credit to the rookie for getting this one out because it was nasty. But, oh gosh. Any final thoughts as we wrap up, headed into our first divisional matchup?
It can only get better. I mean, it's hard to be worse than one net passing yard. I guess theoretically it's possible. But it's pretty likely that at the end of Fields' career, we look back and this is his worst game.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how does it not get worse? Or how does it get any worse? I don't want the answer to that. I feel like...
I suppose he didn't turn the ball over at all, so he could have those 4 or 5 turnover games that would probably be worse than this.
Probably. But even then, maybe I'd just be happy he was trying something. Really the only thing that I think I could say about this one as we wrap it up is I feel like this was pretty definitive. If you weren't out, capital O out, on Matt Nagy, you probably are now, and I don't think that's the wrong place to be. Schematically, there's just too many things that he's been stealing from McVay and Shanahan that he could have done in this situation to make it better than it was, or at least make things feel a little bit less utterly pitiful. Because it felt like past a certain point, the sacks were just a given. The Browns lined up in a bear front at one point, which means 5 down linemen. And I remember thinking, okay, so this is a sack. And it was. We really got to the point where you could call sacks out because it was a one-on-one matchup. I think James Daniels lost to Myles Garrett, and it was over. This was pitiful. And I really wouldn't pin it on Fields because, don't get me wrong, it's not like he was conventionally good if you graded him on a snap-to-snap basis, but I really don't think that that's fair to talk about for a rookie quarterback playing with no help whatsoever. But so, my final thought, I guess, is that in the big picture, the funny part about this game, Johnathan, is that here we are, 1-2, going into the Lions game, just like we anticipated. It's been a rocky road to get here, right? Where we got demolished by the Rams, bad defense, decent offense, and then we got demolished by the Browns, horrible offense, great defense, but we're 1-2 all the same. And Justin Fields is currently set to start that game, so technically we're on the right track, even though it feels like we're backing into it, more so than driving down that road. I see you laughing. Does that mean you kind of agree?
Yeah, I mean, the most popular opinion for going into week 4 was what kind of everybody pointed to is that's going to be Fields' time because the first 3 weeks were kind of Dalton's the sacrificial lamb. He only made it through half that time, but yeah, they're 1-2 after 3 weeks, just like we all expected, and Fields is probably starting against Detroit, just like most of us expected. So I guess time to flush the first 3 weeks and the season starts now.
It's, ugh, oh gosh. I mean, even that, I know I'm being overly optimistic. Like, this was so rough. But you can't hire Brian Daboll in the middle of the season. Nor can you hire Joe Brady or promote Sean Desai. I mean, maybe you could promote Sean Desai, but you got to think it would be Bill Lazor. Bears have never fired a head coach. Who knows what happens from here? Because it does feel, to your point, Johnathan, like you could make the argument this is a year well too late. But we will have to see. At the end of the day, it's one game. And this is something my dad would always say, right? He'd say, you're never as good or as bad as your last game. And so, for the Bears' sake, you got to hope that bears some merit. Johnathan, thanks so much for commiserating with me. Where can folks find you online?
You can find me, I mainly hang out on Twitter at Johnathan_Wood.
It's Johnathan_Wood1, right?
Oh, is it? Oops. You think I know this after like 10 years, but you never look at your own thing. Sorry. So, yeah, Johnathan_Wood1.
I copy
apparently.
it into articles all the time. And so I have to know because I'm like, it's got a 1 on it. But either way, yeah. As always, Bears fans, you can find my work online at Windy City Gridiron. You can find me on YouTube at Run Pass Opinion, breaking different things down. Got a Jalen Johnson breakdown up right now, which thank God, Odell Beckham Jr. didn't just embarrass him because I was really worried about a Quinn situation happening again. But yeah, either way, this was a weird game to watch. But thanks so much for hanging out and talking through it with me. Bears fans, until next time. Bear down. Well, thank you so much for bumbling through that one with me. Have you been reading through the chat as we've gone through it?
I have not. My computer has some issues sometimes.
You got to pull it up.
So I have too much going. Yeah, I'll try to pull it up here, but I was worried it would make me start freezing or glitching.
Oh, no worries at all. John De La Talia says, thanks, Johnathan, so much for all your stats analysis and articles. He loves them. So know that you've got fans. People said like, whoa, 2 big names talking through this. So getting a lot of love from the chat right now.
Appreciate that. Always fun to just hang out and talk Bears.
Akusai,
might be over.
I may have to go back in and edit that because you're right. I forgot to say thanks so much for bearing with me. But either way, my one mistake, I don't know. This was such a scatterbrained episode because, Johnathan, I don't know what to take away other than the obvious. You know what I mean? Like, this was such a demolition derby. It's not like we can say, oh, if they can get the deep passing game going a little bit better. Like, whoa, this was a nightmare.
Yeah, it was literally everybody on the offense except for David Montgomery I can point to and be like, what the heck were you doing today? Like,
right.
There's nobody who I can even point to as, oh, yeah, you kind of did your job. Maybe Cody Whitehair? I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch, but I don't remember seeing his guy making a ton of plays. But all of the other offensive linemen, there were multiple replays where it was like, oh, you just got, like, destroyed instantly. Cool. Yep.
Oh, terrible. I love some of the comments that we're seeing, by the way. So John says that this offense was the worst offensive pace entire tenure. I can't argue with that, Like, I think even John Fox had stronger offensive days than this. Like, which is stunning. But probably true.
Yeah, there's that's the coaches will say a lot of times you're just gonna burn that tape or throw that one in the garbage or whatever, but they legitimately have to do that with this game. I don't know what else they can take away from it.
Right. I think my biggest struggle, John, is I can name like 10 burn the tape games. You know what I mean? Like during just the Nagy tenure alone, I can name like the Rams game in 2018 was really terrible. The Packers game in 2019 was awful. Both Packers games in 2020 were horrible. The the New Orleans one might not even qualify, the playoff game, as a burn the tape game, because we kind of all knew it was coming at that point. Like, they didn't look extra bad. They just looked beat.
In Minnesota game with Foles last year was probably the closest to this, in that they just absolutely did not move the ball the entire day. I don't remember the exact stats for that one, but I think they were still under 100 yards well into the second half. And finally, Minnesota kind of called off the dogs late, and Foles picked up some garbage time, meaningless stuff. But that's kind of been the moral of the story of the Bears for the last few years, is garbage time offensive production, making the first three quarters not look as bad as they were. They did that with like Tennessee last year too. They just didn't even get the garbage this year because Cleveland was just like, nope, we're not calling off the dogs. We want to, they were clearly out to prove something with their defense today. They had their cornerbacks playing aggressive man coverage until the final whistle. Just like, no, we're not giving you anything.
Credit to them. Like, they played a beautiful defensive game. Like, we've been on the other end of that. You know what I mean? Like, throughout 2018, where it's like, wow, we are kicking the snot out of them. You could even make the argument that we were there just last week against the Bengals. But not quite. But you get the idea, with like holding them to 3 points for the overwhelming majority of the game. But yeah, I think what hurts a lot, Johnathan, is that like going back through the Trubisky era, through all of it, like I started trying to log when games quote unquote ended by when I picked a 95% win percentage, right, as the threshold. Like once you crossed 95 and the game still ended that way, so no comeback attempt, which is arbitrary, but you know what, sue me, you got to make a cutoff somewhere. And it was like they lost the Week 12 Packers game midway through the second quarter. They lost the 2019 Saints game before the first half ended. They lost, like, there's so many of these that you could go through and be like, and it was over well before the fourth quarter. Like, we're not even talking about whether or not they played competitive December football, because I know that was a big thing during John Fox's era. It was like, I want December to matter. They're not even playing 60-minute games. And it felt like as soon as Cleveland punched that ball in at the end of right after the 4th and 2 that they kicked on, game is over, you know?
Yeah, if anything, credit to Chicago for both the Rams game and this one were just absolute blowouts, but both of them were one-score games going into the fourth quarter. If just barely, but they were somehow hanging in when they were so clearly outclassed, and both of those just finally fell apart on them at the end of the game.
I feel like the hardest part, to your point, Johnathan. Oh, did I cut you off? I'm so sorry.
There were people on my Twitter timeline who said, like, when they scored a touchdown right before halftime, ball game, and honestly, it was hard to disagree with how bad the offense was in the first. Yeah, that ended up being the winning score, 10 points.
10 points.
Which is laughably pathetic for 2021 in the NFL with the rules so tilted towards offense.
Yep. And I don't really care about the whole, like, oh, it takes 4 years for Nagy to bake his offense. That's all coach speak. I mean, like, the complicated part about all this is that, like, if there's one thing we've learned about Matt Nagy, it's that he's a liar. And so he'll say whatever he needs to the media to just sort of get him to leave him alone. I mean, I think Ryan Pace would do the same thing, but Ryan Pace is not scheduled to talk to the media 3 times a week. So we get to hear it from Nagy. You know what I mean? But the part about this that I feel like has gotten most pathetic, I may have lost my train of thought, unfortunately. By the way, chat, feel free to ask questions if you want to. Like, feel free to submit any questions that you have for either of us. They can be about anything. You want to talk about something fun? Sure. But it is to the point where I feel like the fact that they don't even know how to teach toss crack really bothers me. Like, Allen Robinson just blatantly missed a blocking assignment that would have had Jason Peters one-on-one against the safety. And if he didn't get there, like, David Montgomery could have just run for 2 yards anyways. Instead, you've got a free defender coming in. Like, goodness gracious. It's just the worst part. So, Mark Smith, you said, like, wouldn't it be better to at least have a basic limited offense with low yield rather than a complicated offense where nothing works? That's the worst part. The Bears aren't running a complicated offense. They're just making simple offense look complicated. Does that make sense, Jonathan?
Absolutely. And that's something I seem to wonder a lot. And granted, I'm also a Northwestern fan for college football, and they're kind of the same way that like their defense has kept them competitive, but their offense has generally been bad for the last several years. And but when I watch my football teams, it's just like, why does offense always just like feel so hard when watching anybody else? It's like defense feels so hard because that's the way that it's supposed to be.
Yep.
Watching the Bears, it's just always like it feels like the offense is at an inherent disadvantage. Like you don't expect them to be able to do anything good when that's not supposed to be the case. Like the rules are literally set up for offenses. Move the ball and score points. Why does this feel so hard?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the biggest problem that the Bears have had, and I said this just to own up to it. I said this about Trubisky for a long time. His folks said, play to his strengths. And I said, what are his strengths? And to be fair to him, the answer is throwing the ball short, I guess. Because he's not a great deep thrower. He's not a great intermediate thrower. He's not electric with his feet. But this isn't about Trubisky. The point is that Nagy hasn't exactly developed a strength either. Like, the Bears' offense doesn't have that thing that you have to stop. They're hit the point where the Bears were going to roll Justin Fields out, and Cleveland said, well, I don't really care about your run fake. Like, run the ball. Go for it. What are you going to do? And I sit there and I'm like, what? Was that the wrong call? You know, like it was dead on. I mean, the Bears can't get their wide receivers to block a screen. The Bears' inside zone attack has never materialized. Like, the Bears have not figured out how to do anything. When Cleveland drafts Baker Mayfield and backs into Cleveland drafts Baker Mayfield. Baker's not the guy who they quite want him to be, so they make him the guy they want him to be by protecting him with one of the most beastly running attacks in football. That's really solid direction, you know? The Bears, on the other hand, are asking for Justin Fields, a rookie, to save him, or to save them. And that's ridiculous because, like Akusai says, I mean, I didn't get to yell enough about how angry I am at Jermaine Ifedi jumping off sides because it's just so common inside of this offense. Hey, you need a third down? Get ready to do it 5 yards further backwards. You know what I mean?
Hey, at least today they didn't waste a timeout in the first quarter because they didn't get a play call in time. Maybe. Woo-hoo! I think that's the first game this year where they have got into the second quarter without using a timeout, and they've done that a lot the last few years.
Tweet
too.
that. That is hilarious.
And then they didn't have the out of timeout. Then they didn't even have the out of timeout play where everything is too complicated, so they screw up somehow. I guess that was the entire day today, to be fair. But they didn't have that sequence that I was watching for, so I got to give credit where credit's due.
Mm-hmm. no timeout problems, and the trouble is that I feel like Jay Sanders says like just promote laser. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like I think that would hurt anything, you know? There's nothing that I can point to 4 years into this that says Nagy's better than laser. The biggest problem that I have, because I finally remembered, J-Dub, where I was at earlier, is the worst part about this Nagy tenure has been watching what feels like an unequivocally good locker room manager that cannot coach offense. Like, some of the performances that they've had, it shocks me, for instance, that the defense was this crisp and has been this crisp. That the defense with the offense, as bad as it has been, has just never given up. I know they're professionals, but like they really haven't over time. And I feel like if somebody says like the complicated thing, you tell me where you feel, because I know I'm kind of getting there. That it does feel like this is like if you wrapped Mark Trestman inside of a really inspirational person, apparently. You know what I mean? Like, it's like Trestman was neither the head coach that they needed nor the offensive guru that they needed. In fact, maybe his scheme wasn't so bad because they tended to produce more on offense than this, to say the least. But with Nagy, we're getting the guy who seems to be inspiring enough to the locker room, especially when they win. But they... I mean, for crying out loud, I keep going back to their number one wide receiver, the guy who wants to get paid $22 million, like blocking the wrong person on a key third down at the start of the game. Like, this is the fourth year, you know? Why are we still watching Javon Wims, who's a 6'1", just completely miss block people? I don't get it.
Yeah, and that's the hard part with this offense is like they just always seem sloppy. There's always like it feels rare to have a play where nobody completely messes up their assignment. It's part of why I'm so uninterested in going back to Dalton is because like, with all the dink and dunk, you need to put together like 10 to 15 play drives to score. But literally, if one thing goes wrong, that doesn't work. And the odds of them stringing together 10 to 15 plays where nothing goes wrong, well, they did it twice in a game and a half. There's just zero upside to that. At least Fields will try to make plays, although that results in getting Fields killed behind a terrible offensive line. I don't know how that does either, I suppose.
You know, I just had an idea that I have to ask you, because what I'm about to suggest is a bit radical. Let's just call it this, right? Okay, so would it help the Bears more to hit the reset button at the trade deadline than it would to just do it in the offseason? Like, does the early start, based on what you've seen, help? For instance, Robert Quinn is currently actually drawing some trade value. You know what I mean? Like, you could probably trade Quinn. You might be able to trade Hicks to a contender that loses somebody. You could probably trade Dalton. Like, does actually admitting it's over early help the team more so than doing it in the offseason?
I mean, ultimately that's going to depend on what kind of value you could get for those guys. And I feel like it's just weird. Football is different than like hockey, baseball, basketball all have pretty active trade deadlines where big players will move. That doesn't really happen in football for a variety of reasons. And I don't think it's likely here either, even if they're like, you know, the worst case scenario and they're like 1-7, whatever, going into the trade deadline that they just keep losing. But like, how many teams have cap space to take any of those guys on? How many teams are willing to give up something like that for a 30-plus-year-old player? Robert Quinn, then, okay, he's got a $13 million salary next year. Is somebody wanting to pay that to him when he's 32? I don't know. And like Dalton in particular, I mean, quarterbacks, like it takes a while to learn the offense. I don't think an in-season quarterback trade is very likely at all.
Oh, I agree with everything you're saying. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think from the perspective of, okay, so say I'm George McCaskey, right? And Brad Biggs actually hinted at this, right? He hinted in an article that maybe the Bears holding on to Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy had more to do with just money and lost revenue than we realize. That it was literally a matter of, we can't pay for that. Which, hey, I see you like closing your eyes and getting all sad, but you know, Occam's razor says that sometimes the simplest solution is an option. So who's to say? I don't know. Let's just put it out there. I know nothing. It was in a Brad Biggs article in like January. So maybe. If that was the case and and McCaskey was already souring, theoretically, couldn't you trade Quinn and hold on to his salary this year, for instance? Like, you could do a bunch of cap manipulation that says the ship has gone down. It is just a matter of, like, if you will take on his future contract, we'll hold back this year, and you get a pass rusher. In Dalton's case, I know it took 7 weeks for Garoppolo to learn the offense. So theoretically, if you traded him, he'd be ready to go by playoff time for, say, an Indianapolis Colts team that doesn't want a backup of Brett Hundley and instead maybe thinks that Andy Dalton could be a better backup should something go wrong with Carson Wentz. I don't know. This is entirely speculative. You know what I mean? Like, the chances of Pace hitting the reset button and basically firing himself are slim to none. But it does occur to me that if you could get rid, for instance, a player I want to keep, Roquan Smith. A player that doesn't fit under the cap, Roquan Smith. Unless you figured out a way to jettison some of the Goldman or Hicks or Quinn or other contracts that you have on your roster, you know?
Yeah, I think this is why I've been screaming about this for 2 off seasons now.
Yeah,
Like it
you
was
have.
crystal clear after 2019 that this team was not going to be contending anytime soon until they had another quarterback. They had no path to getting that quarterback, so it called for that exact reset. So that right now, with Fields as that next quarterback, they would be flush with cap space and draft picks to be building around him. But instead, they keep trying to desperately plug one hole in the boat while 4 more pop up somewhere else.
Right.
Future to do it. And now they've got an old, overpaid roster that they can't easily get out of a lot of these guys. They're going to have to eat a ton of dead money to get out of some of these deals. And it's going to hinder what they can do around Fields for at least 2022 and probably 2023 as well. Not that they'll be completely screwed. You know, year 2 is often when the quarterback makes that jump, like we are hoping Fields will. But it takes a good roster around that QB to win a Super Bowl. And I don't know that they're going to be able to have it between their lack of money and lack of draft picks.
Right.
So maybe 2023 or 2024 at the earliest. Like, it's all about the window of when Fields is cheap and ideally in years 2 through 4 playing like a 40 million plus a year quarterback for like 5 million a year.
Right. And
Diligently for that.
I feel like what makes this worse is I'm so torn because I don't like Ryan Pace. I really haven't liked Ryan Pace for a good little bit. I really can't stand all the trades. To give an example of exactly how I feel about it. Look, we just like talking through everything. While Tevin Jenkins was a very good player, and I know I gave him a really high draft grade because everybody around me was just ecstatic about him, and I absolutely bit that hook. If you had told me the Bears traded a 2nd and 3rd round pick for a guy they knew had injury question marks so that he could plug one of 3 holes on the Bears offensive line, I think I would have taken the 2nd round or 3rd round pick and instead gotten a center. Instead gotten like a Dylan Radins and so on and so forth, instead of seemingly pinning everything on Larry Borum out of the 5th round. So I don't know. I'm not even like saying that to be down on Jenkins himself. Like, you pick up what I'm saying, like where it's not about Jenkins. It's about the bet that Pace made. And that instead we said Sam Mustipher's good enough, and I don't like that. Exactly like Akusai just said, if Pace sticks around, you can book a trade back into the late 1st round. You know? It's coming. It's going to happen. And so the team doesn't necessarily get better until, goodness gracious, you stop doing that, for crying out loud. John DiTalia said again, I think you'll like this because actually I find this, John, I think you hit the nail on the head, that the GM and the HC, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, get along on betting everything on a single plan. And if it doesn't work, that's it. Game over. You know?
Yeah, and I'm seeing some comments talking about like the Bears should be trying to like acquire some of these young guys who were highly drafted but have fallen out of favor in their current places, like Zell Mims or Noah Igbinoghene. I probably butchered that. Sorry. I feel like that's the opposite of what they need to be doing, at least in terms of trading for them, because then you have to give up draft picks for guys who, you know, they're not playing in their current teams for a reason. Those are the types of guys who you take a chance on them. If they get cut, then, you know, maybe they can turn it around here. You know, it's like what Pace did with Ifedi. He was a former highly drafted player. First team let him go, and then Pace signed him for real cheap to play. That's the kind of value move you want to make with those types of players. And the Bears absolutely in the offseason need to be looking at those types of moves. But I don't think trading away picks for players like that mid-season is really what they need to be doing in their position right now.
Right. We'll see what happens. It'll be interesting. We've got a Browns fan in here. I want you to know, truth hurts. We thought the Browns played great. I mean, it's not, I would not argue that there's any Browns animosity. If anything, I hope your defense keeps it up so that Bears fans don't feel even worse about getting absolutely shuttered, for crying out loud. Like, I hope that that's the new normal, you know? But we'll see. Either way, the Browns play like a team that I think a lot of Bears fans are into watching. Like, run heavy, roll outs, get as much out of your quarterback as possible, play great defense behind him, so on and so forth. Like, yeah, we're just mad at us.
Yeah.
But either way, so let's see. We'll take a couple more questions, talk for a little bit longer, but I don't know if you've seen this, Johnathan. We've got a bunch of barn burners going down. The Rams are ahead 7 on Tampa Bay. The Dolphins with Brissett are 2 points ahead of the Raiders at halftime, and the Vikings in Seattle are making it an absolutely standard Seattle Seahawks game that is coming down to the wire through 30 minutes. So it's like, this is the kind of thing that that's the kind of day I don't want to keep anybody from past a certain point, especially because we all need some palate cleansing.
Yeah, absolutely. Go watch. Oh, that's what an offense is supposed to look like.
Right.
I had forgotten.
Oh, Johnathan, did you see that unbelievable Justin Tucker kick? Somebody talked about it. We have to at least mention it.
I think he set a new NFL record, right? A 66-yarder. And of course, his doink's in, not out, because that's what happens when you're actually good, is you get lucky like that.
I always think it's so funny, by the way, when that sort of thing happens, because what is it? The field goal doink's in, and yet for some reason I feel convinced Justin Tucker was like, it was always going to be in, baby. Like, it never a doubt in my mind.
What's that quote? Like the good players think it's going in. The great players know it's going in.
Right, exactly.
I think that's a quote for like a shot in the clutch. But yeah, I think that applies here too. You know, Justin Tucker might be the best kicker in NFL history.
If
certainly
he's
the best
not,
of his generation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if he isn't, I feel like he made a mark on the NFL that I think he's played so well he deserved to make it. Does that make sense? Like, he deserved to have that rememberable moment, and now he's in the record books, and the kick itself is unreal. Like, this isn't a 66-yarder in a blowout. This isn't a halftime, you know, like, well, what the heck? We'll just roll Sebastian Janikowski out there and just let him just, like, kick it as hard as he can. This was a game winner in a game where, what?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they were down by 1, right? So
Yes.
It wasn't even like, if I miss, we go to overtime. It was
If
like,
you
this
miss,
is for all
we lose.
The Lions. Man.
So I
Any
feel,
given Sunday.
well, speaking of, just so that we can get ourselves prepared for next week, this is not a preview show. I have done minimal research on the Lions. They do look better this year. You know? Like, Matt Stafford and Matt Patricia did not look as consistent, at the very least, as Jared Goff has looked under Dan Campbell. I mean, Matt Patricia is one of those coaches that you hope stayed on the Lions forever, because he really found a way to, like, put people in the worst position possible. And right now, Campbell seems at least neutral. Like, they aren't playing with Jeff Okudah playing well. In fact, I think he's hurt and was already playing bad before then. So there's enough wrong with the Lions.
In the first week.
Right. Like, there's enough wrong with the Lions to where they should be worse than this. And their record may end up being absolutely putrid. But they aren't that bad. Does that make sense? Like, from a culture and belief standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, they gave San Francisco something of a game in week 1. They gave Baltimore everything they could handle today, and I know they gave Green Bay a game for a little over a half in week 2 last week.
It was a heck of a game,
That's
too.
all I've seen.
Like, that Green Bay game
Granted,
was...
I don't think the defense is all that good,
I hope not.
but we'll see.
And yet, no. Okay, so they gave up 41, and then they gave up like 35, and then they gave up 19. And even 19 might as well have an asterisk, because you shouldn't be able to hit that kick. and yet Justin Tucker did. But, oh, man. So the GM HC stuff I feel like will have to come later, because we're getting a lot of chat questions about, like, who would you hire? And it's like, the GM stuff is weird because I just defer to all the guys that Brad Spielberger from Over the Cap, or formerly Over the Cap, now PFF, tells me, because I know nothing about GM stuff. Like, Omar Kelly is a guy that I always mentioned because I love the way Pittsburgh tends to do things. I think outside of the quarterback quandary that they've put themselves in, them and the rest of their organization, Tomlin, consistently assemble like a really competitive team, even when they play a guy named Duck Hodges, for crying out loud. Like, I think they still made the playoffs that year, and if not, they just barely missed it. So I would love to see Omar Kelly. I don't actually know if the next GM, I'm gonna hit you with a hot take here, Jonathan. I don't know if the next GM is gonna be as good of a scout as Pace is, but I want them to take more shots. You know what I mean? I'll take some fifth round, from some fifth and sixth and seventh round inefficiency. And by inefficiency, I mean, like, you're not hitting Bilal Nichols right after, or like Darnell Mooney right after what Larry Borum looks like so far. But even so, like, let's pick in the third round, for crying out loud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that to me has been like the most frustrating thing about Pace is, like, I feel like he'd be a great number 2 because he's really good in the draft generally. I know people hate his round 1 picks, which have certainly been a bit more hit or miss, but he's generally done a good job with the picks he uses in the draft. He just doesn't, he's like an impulse gambler. He doesn't understand how to maximize the odds. And so you have somebody else making the final decision, but with his input, I think, that's probably what happens when he gets fired here eventually, is he goes and takes a high up but not number 1 position somewhere else. Is going to crush that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the next guy we get probably draft as well, but can hopefully still run a team more intelligently.
Gosh, I hope so. And similarly, like, actually, I have no idea. When I think about Ben Nagy, the worst part about it is that his offense doesn't look like he knows how to do anything, like, specifically. I mean, I have seen him borrow concepts from place where I would look and say, that's a good concept. Good one to borrow. I like that. But gracious alive, I really can't get off the fact that Matt Nagy took a rookie that was going to struggle processing a tough defense and didn't protect him. I mean, you don't end up at 9 sacks on accident, So, whatever. Either way.
Yeah.
I know I'm at about my Bears limit right now. I don't know about you. It's one of those, like...
Yeah, I should probably get going, too.
Gotta grab a snack, gotta grab this or that. So we'll see where Matt Nagy inevitably lands. We'll see what ends up happening. I don't want to go... I don't want to go listen to his presser, but I feel like I have to. So there's that. Jonathan, anything you want to say to the chat before we hop off?
Thanks for having me. It's been a great time. Would love to do this again sometime, but always fun to hang out with you, Robert.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for hopping on. Guys, until next time, bear down, and thanks so much for bearing with me. I'll also see you on Wednesday. I feel like I have to plug that in. Wednesday night. Let's do it. We're still going to go through the game. We're still going to walk through We'll do a lot of defense, like, come for the defense, stay for the offense. So, there you go. Either way, guys, thanks so much for hopping on. We'll see you later.